Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are wrestling with just an astonishingly broad stack of sources. It covers millennia of human strategy, everything from, the stoic wisdom of Roman senators right up to the complex organizational charts of modern tech giants.
It really is a deep dive spanning time. We've got classical political philosophy, Cicero, Machiavelli, Hobbes, and then that sort of colliding with modern corporate success stories like Google's OKRs, the rigorous goal setting there, and Pixar's Brain Trust, that creative engine.
Yeah, the sheer variety feels almost overwhelming at first, but then you realize they're all grappling with the same, core dilemma. How do you actually build systems, whether it's governance or personal character or business models, that can endure and really perform under pressure?
Exactly. And our mission today is kind of move beyond just the surface level history and extract those universal enduring mental models, the ones that apply whether you're commanding Roman legions or, leading a team of software developers today.
And that search for the mental model itself is crucial, isn't it? We're looking for the architecture, the actual blueprints of how reality operates in these domains.
Right. And we need to spot the difference between a functional model, one based on, let's say, perennial principles, and maybe a flawed model that someone just put together as a reaction to, like one specific thing that happened in the past.
Because the sources themselves warn us, don't they, that the confidence we feel in our own beliefs can often be, well, frankly, preposterous, especially if that belief is based on pretty flimsy evidence that just happens to tell a really good, coherent story.
Precisely. We want the wisdom that cuts through all that subjective noise.
Okay, so let's start where power itself really begins, with the classical foundations of authority, stability, and that fundamental choice leaders face between ruling by fear and ruling through justice.
Well, Cicero is pretty clear on this. When a leader chooses to rule by fear, they're essentially choosing a path that is ultimately self-consuming. Dread might seem like the most effective tool in the short term, for compliance.
Get people to fall in line quickly.
Exactly. But history just shows again and again that it's profoundly destabilizing in the long run.
And the psychological cost of being a tyrant? Often it's the tyrant themselves who pays the heaviest price, right? They have to live in this constant state of high alert. Cicero gives us those chilling details about the elder Dionysius of Syracuse.
Oh, absolutely. This is a man so consumed by paranoia, he literally couldn't trust the people closest to him. His fear of assassination, specifically getting his throat cut by a razor,
Yeah.
it became so intense he just stopped using a barber altogether.
Yeah.
Instead, he'd use a burning coal to singe the hair off his own face.
Wow. Imagine just the physical and mental torment required to maintain that level of distrust. It sounds like ruling by fear makes life a living hell for the ruler, too. A constant psychological siege.
It really does. And fear doesn't just breed that kind of self-torment. It practically guarantees betrayal. The story of Alexander of Pherae is even darker, perhaps. Supposedly, he loved his wife, Thebe, but his fear dictated every single interaction. When he would go into her chamber at night, he'd insist that a specific attendant, described as this sort of tattooed barbarian figure, go in first with the drawn sword, searching the room, searching her for any concealed weapons.
Even his own wife.
Even his wife. He built this whole structure of caution based on absolute distrust, but ultimately it was completely futile.
So what happened?
That very same wife, Thebe, later organized his assassination. The sources really show that the fear he imposed necessitated his caution, but that caution failed precisely because it alienated the people closest to him. Fear becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy of instability.
And this instability isn't just personal, right? It scales up. Cicero points out the geopolitical danger, too.
Yes, exactly. He talks about the Lacedaemonians, the Spartans when they tried to usurp power across Greece, when disaster finally struck them at the Battle of Leuctra.
What happened with their allies?
Almost all of them deserted. They just stood by as idle spectators. Fear completely dissolves trust, and trust is, well, it's the absolute bedrock of alliances, whether they're personal or international.
It's like the great acid for cohesion, as you said. Okay, but we can't really talk about fear in leadership without bringing in Machiavelli's, let's say, more sophisticated counterpoint.
No, you can't. He acknowledges that, look, if a leader must choose between being feared and being loved, it's generally safer to be feared. But, and this is the critical distinction, the leader must be both a most valiant lion and a most cunning fox. And the ultimate goal has to be to avoid being hated.
Avoiding hatred, that seems to be the whole ballgame for Machiavelli. Because once hatred sets in, that fear transforms into active resistance, plotting. Just like Dionysius found out.
Exactly. Machiavelli uses the example of Emperor Severus.
Huh.
Now, Severus was known for his violence, his ruthlessness, but he managed to cultivate such intense fear and respect from his army.
The army specifically.
Yes, the army specifically, that he was crucially not hated by them. And because his supreme renown, his reputation, was so firmly established with them,
He protected him.
that renown protected him from the usual consequences of his actions. Machiavelli isn't just looking at power morally, he's analyzing it practically. He's saying, look, if you can harness fear without tipping over into like popular revulsion, that specific calculus gives you a supreme advantage. But it's a constant tightrope walk between respect and terror. Hashtag 1.2, governance and the common good.
Okay, so moving from the nature of command itself to the foundational structure of the state, we should probably turn to Aristotle to understand what makes governance legitimate in the first place. What makes a constitution correct in his view?
Aristotle gives us a pretty simple but really powerful metric. A correct constitution is one that aims at the common benefit of the qualified citizens. We can maybe simplify that. If the governing system genuinely aims for the public good, it's legitimate.
And if it doesn't?
If the government aims solely at the benefit of the rulers themselves, their families, their cronies, their interests, then Aristotle considers it a deviant or corrupted form of rule.
So legitimacy really comes down to the intent of the system. Is it serving the whole community or just the powerful few? And this immediately brings up that classical political concern about economic stability, which Cicero addressed very directly.
Oh, Cicero was completely unequivocal on this. He argued that states were established chiefly, that was his main point, to ensure the undisturbed possession of private property.
Right. For the classical mindset, protecting property rights wasn't just like an economic policy. It was central to political stability and encouraging people to be productive.
Exactly. And this is where the discussion gets highly relevant to our own political discourse today, actually. Cicero saw profound danger in any statements tending toward an equal division of property. He saw that as fundamentally undermining the very reason the state was created.
He gives an example, doesn't he? Philippus.
Yes. The example of Philippus is quite stark. Philippus was arguing for an agrarian law, basically a proposal to redistribute land. And in making his case, he said something Cicero called a criminal utterance.
What did he say?
Philippus stated that in the entire city, only about 2,000 men actually had any property at all.
Okay, and regardless of whether that number was even accurate.
Right. The mere statement itself suggests a fundamental failure of the state to protect its citizens' ability to acquire and hold property. And of course, it creates deep societal resentment. Cicero argues this kind of rhetoric just poisons the well. It threatens the very foundation of property, which he believes was why people sought the defense of cities and states to begin with.
So this tension between property rights and wealth disparity, it's not new at all. It's an ancient question about the sustainability of the whole governing contract. Hashtag 1.3, the conflict between reason and honesty.
And that focus on the governing contract leads us straight into maybe the deepest ethical tension. The conflict between pure self-interest and the need for, well, moral covenants or promises. Hobbes frames this brilliantly in Leviathan with the logic of the fool.
Ah, the fool. Right. He's kind of the ultimate pragmatist, isn't he? He questions whether breaking a promise, a covenant, can possibly be against reason if doing so leads to a huge personal benefit like, say, getting yourself a kingdom.
Exactly. The fool argues, look, all voluntary human actions are aimed at one's own benefit. Therefore, the most rational actions must be those that best help you achieve your own ends. If breaking your word gets you what you want.
Then isn't that the rational thing to do?
That's the fool's logic. It's pure outcome bias. If I break my word and I gain this massive advantage, who's to say that wasn't the rational, maybe even the virtuous path in that situation?
And Hobbes acknowledges that this happens, right? That successful wickedness sometimes gets called virtue.
He does. He notes the reality that sometimes even people who generally disapprove of violating faith might admire or even praise someone who pulls it off successfully on a grand scale. This is the dark side of ambition when it's completely unconstrained by any universal ethics.
It really is the ultimate test of integrity, isn't it? Do you sacrifice an immediate, potentially massive gain for the sake of this more abstract societal good of keeping your word?
And Cicero, unlike the fool, holds the line absolutely here. He offers a firm moral rule. What seems expedient must not actually be wrong. Or, if it is wrong, it must not seem to be expedient. The action itself has to be fundamentally moral, regardless of the tactical win it might deliver you.
He gives an anecdote about this too, involving Marius.
Yes, the anecdote about Marius. He was a praetor, a magistrate, around the time of a major currency decree aimed at fixing fluctuating values. He and his colleagues all agreed they would collaborate on the decree and then announce it jointly later that afternoon.
Okay, a joint announcement. Makes sense.
But Marius, well, he was eager for an immediate boost in popularity, probably because an election was coming up. He saw a tactical opportunity.
What did he do?
He immediately went out onto the rostrum alone and announced the decree himself, completely forestalled his colleagues, stole all the glory.
Wow. So he made a wide departure from good faith, as Cicero puts it, for the high-value prize of maybe winning the consulship later.
Precisely. And Cicero then poses the crucial question, was Marius a good man? And his answer is a resounding no, because to lie, to slander, to forestall your colleagues, that's fundamentally out of harmony with the very conception of a good person.
So for Cicero, the expediency just wasn't worth the cost to integrity.
Exactly. He asks, what value can expediency possibly bring that is equal to the value it takes away when it robs you of your truth and your honesty? Integrity is the non-negotiable bedrock, even if it means losing the immediate tactical victory.
Okay, so we've established that external power seems to rely on justice and reputation. But that reputation itself is built upon something deeper internal strength. So now we're moving kind of from the architecture of the state to the architecture of the self. And Emerson gives us this almost magnetic view of character.
Yeah, Emerson's take is really interesting. He defines men of character not just as, moral agents, but as the actual conscience of society. They represent the stable, positive pole in what he sees as the world's bipolar nature, this constant oscillation between, say, will or spirit on one side and event or fact on the other.
So their consistency, their integrity aligns them with the just and the true. And that makes them influential just by being who they are.
That's the idea. They don't have to try to be influential. Their character exerts this kind of magnetic force. And the real test of this inner power, Emerson argues, is how they handle the resistance of circumstances.
What does he mean by that?
Well, he says, feeble souls look almost exclusively at the immediate profit or hurt of any action. They desperately wish to be loved by others.
Seeking external validation.
Exactly. Rather than striving to be lovely in themselves. It's a profound distinction.
Loved versus lovely. So the person of character seeks the essence, the internal quality.
Right. They seek to be lovely, intrinsically good. And interestingly, Emerson says men of character actually like to hear of their faults.
Why is that?
Because they're focused on optimizing that internal essence, their core being, not just managing external perceptions. They want the feedback to improve the actual structure.
And this leads to Emerson's most potent, maybe slightly terrifying diagnosis of failure. No change of circumstances can repair a defect of character.
It's stark, isn't it? If your fundamental internal architecture is compromised, no tactical maneuver, no change of job, no political victory, no amount of external success is going to solve the underlying systemic issue.
And that internal clarity, that solid foundation, is also what allows them to overcome fear.
Yes. Emerson sees fear, and it doesn't matter what the object is, whether it's public opinion or poverty or fear of revolution. He sees fear fundamentally as a vice. If we allow ourselves to be capable of fear, he suggests, it will readily find terrors to latch onto.
So the person of character is grounded enough in principle to be sort of immune to that constant internal quaking.
That's the ideal, yes. Their center holds because it's based on something more solid than shifting external events. Hashtag 2.2, the mindset for true fulfillment.
Okay, this internal grounding, it's not just Western philosophical rhetoric, is it? It ties directly into some really deep transcendental concepts of action, particularly from Eastern thought. The Bhagavad Gita, for example, offers a very precise spiritual and, frankly, psychological prescription for effective action.
Absolutely. It introduces the concept of performing your work, your bodily work, without desire for the result. The principle is called nirashir.
Without desire for the result. So giving up proprietorship over the outcome.
Exactly. Not because the outcome doesn't matter at all, but because attaching your identity, your emotional state, your sense of self-worth to that outcome is ultimately detrimental.
Why is that? What's the danger?
Well, the Gita argues that if you work primarily for sense gratification, for the enjoyment of the fruits of your labor, it inevitably brings material misery in the long run. There's always anxiety, competition, loss. But if you work with detachment, without claiming ownership over the results, just doing the work as your duty, then the work itself doesn't acquire those negative binding consequences, what the text calls kilbium, or sinful reactions.
So for a modern, maybe more secular audience, how does that translate?
I think it translates directly to avoiding the corrosive side effects of unchecked ambition. You strive for excellence in your work, absolutely. But you're not emotionally destroyed if the market suddenly pivots or the project fails for reasons beyond your control. It's maybe the ultimate key to preventing burnout. You control the input, the effort, not the output.
Hmm. And we see this mirrored, interestingly, in modern psychological research on self-actualization, people like Maslow and Frankl.
Yes, Maslow observed that self-actualizing people, those who reach their full potential, are no longer primarily motivated by deficiency, by what they lack. They don't strive in that ordinary, desperate sense anymore. Instead, they simply develop through the expression of their character, their being.
And Viktor Frankl's logotherapy provides some really powerful, almost harrowing clinical evidence for this kind of internal freedom.
It does. His core insight, developed partly from his experiences in concentration camps, is that the search for meaning is paramount to mental health. He cites the example of Vietnam POWs who, despite enduring unspeakable physical torture, disease, malnutrition,
Yeah.
many of them found a profound, transformative benefit in their experience.
How is that even possible?
They chose to view their suffering not just as meaningless agony, but as part of a mission, a way to demonstrate inner fortitude, loyalty, resilience. It showed Frankl that even in the most physically restricted, horrifying circumstances imaginable, the inner freedom to choose your response to life, your attitude towards it, always persists. You can still define the meaning of the moment, even if you can't control the moment itself.
Wow. Which is really the perfect lead-in to Stephen Covey's teaching on the center of one's life.
Absolutely. Covey argues that if you center your life on things that are inherently mutable, constantly changing like possessions, or your spouse, or the next political cycle or public opinion, you're basically subjecting yourself to this exhausting, emotionally draining roller coaster. Your sense of self-worth just goes up and down with external factors.
So what's the alternative?
The only way, Covey argues, to achieve consistent security, guidance, wisdom, and power is by centering your life on correct principles. Things like fairness, integrity, honesty, human dignity.
Because principles don't change based on external circumstances.
Exactly. They are the stable, unchanging core. By establishing this principle-centered approach, you gain the internal integrity, the character strength that's necessary for long-term effectiveness, stability, and resilience. You become immune, in a sense, to that external volatility. Hashtag 2.3, building trust through vulnerability.
Okay, so once that internal security, that principle-centered core is established, you then become capable of the one thing that really defines successful interdependent systems, whether it's a marriage or a company: genuine vulnerability and profound trust.
Yes, and Covey captures this mechanism perfectly with his metaphor of the emotional bank account.
Right, the idea that you make deposits and withdrawals in relationships.
A simple concept on the surface. You make deposits by acting with kindness, keeping promises, showing integrity. You make withdrawals when you're disrespectful, break promises, act unfairly. But where it gets really interesting is exploring what constitutes a great deposit.
What do you mean by a great deposit?
The kind of deposit that can cover major withdrawals, like when you've made a really serious mistake or there's been a significant conflict. These require something more than just being polite.
And what does that require?
It requires genuine internal security because these great deposits demand high vulnerability. The sources are very specific on the actual words needed for a sincere, heartfelt apology, which Covey identifies as one of the biggest deposits you can make.
Like what?
Things like, I was wrong, that was unkind of me, I showed you no respect, I gave you no dignity, and I am deeply sorry.
Those are hard words to say for a lot of people.
Extremely hard. People with low internal security, those centered on mutable things like their image or possessions, they often simply cannot say those things sincerely. They feel it makes them look soft, weak, vulnerable to attack.
But Covey argues that it's precisely that willingness to be vulnerable, to own your mistake fully, that builds the deepest trust.
Exactly. It demonstrates profound character strength, not weakness. And that same internal security is also required for the second core element of building trust: empathic listening.
Which most people are terrible at.
Let's be honest, yes.
Yeah.
Most people operate entirely within their own paradigm, their own frame of reference. They listen with the intent to reply, not to understand. They're constantly filtering everything through their own experiences, their own home movies, as Covey calls them. They're either speaking or they're preparing to speak. They're never truly listening to understand the other person's reality.
So what's the paradigm shift required?
It's seeking first to understand, genuinely trying to see the world through the other person's perspective before you try to make them see yours. The core barrier to influencing someone else, to building real connection, is their lack of feeling understood.
Covey puts it very directly, doesn't he?
He does. He says, unless you're influenced by my uniqueness, I'm not going to be influenced by your advice. You absolutely have to earn the right to influence somebody by first demonstrating that you understand and value their perspective.
Yeah.
You have to allow yourself to be influenced by them first.
And this necessity for high-stakes vulnerability, for deep understanding, for candor, it's literally codified in the operational model of one of the world's most successful creative companies, the Pixar Brain Trust.
Yeah, the brain trust is fascinating.
Yeah.
This is the group of core creative leaders at Pixar who review films while they're in progress, and they are famously ruthlessly critical.
But it works. Why?
According to Ed Catmull, Pixar's co-founder, the single most essential element of the brain trust is candor. But it's a specific kind of candor. It's not just critique. It's the ability to tell the unvarnished truth, however painful it might be.
Knowing what?
Knowing that the recipient of that critique, the director, the producer, is secure enough in their position, in their character, and in the trust within the room, not to retaliate or punish you later for speaking frankly.
So candor is absolutely non-negotiable for that kind of intense creative collaboration.
It is, but Catmull stresses that leaders have to continually protect this environment, because the moment fear creeps back, in fear of saying something stupid, fear of looking bad, fear of career retaliation if you criticize the boss's pet project,
The candor disappears.
instantly, and the collaboration degrades into mediocrity. It requires constant vigilance from leadership to sustain that culture of vulnerability and trust.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork. External stability seems to require justice and reputation. Internal stability requires character strength and principle. Now, how do these fundamental principles translate into actual strategy when you're facing high complexity, volatility, maybe even open conflict, whether that's military or market-driven?
Well, often strategic thinking involves fundamentally redefining the game you're playing. Clausewitz, the great theorist of war, gives us a really powerful reframing of the concept of defense.
How so? He doesn't just mean sitting back and waiting.
No, not at all. He argues that strategic defense, defending a whole theater of war, doesn't necessarily require tactical defense everywhere within that theater.
Okay, explain that.
It's the concept of active defense. While your overall strategic goal is to defend the territory, you retain the absolute freedom to attack the enemy wherever and whenever you please within that theater. You aim to destroy the enemy not necessarily through decisive frontal assaults, but often through exhaustion.
Which sounds a lot like modern guerrilla warfare concepts.
It corresponds perfectly. You use the complexity of the terrain, the support of the local population, your knowledge of the environment. You use these as force multipliers to wear down a stronger opponent over time.
And Sun Tzu, writing centuries earlier, takes this kind of adaptive psychological thinking to perhaps the ultimate extreme when he discusses desperate ground.
Ah, yes, desperate ground. This is when your army is completely trapped, facing what looks like imminent annihilation. The strategy Sun Tzu proposes is brilliantly paradoxical.
What would you do?
You proclaim the utter hopelessness of survival. You actively destroy any means of retreat or comfort. You burn the army's baggage. You smash the cooking stoves.
You make it physically impossible for the soldiers to retreat or even plan for tomorrow.
Exactly. The strategic truth you impose on them is that their only chance of life lies in giving up all hope of it. You deliberately manufacture desperation as a strategic tool.
To maximize their will to fight to the death because there's literally no other option.
Precisely. It's harnessing the psychology of extremity. And we see this theme, this rising tactical complexity, the need for emergent rapid solutions, directly influencing modern organizational design as well.
How so?
We're seeing a really significant and I think necessary shift away from rigid hierarchical command structures where all solutions are expected to come top-down from authority figures.
Towards what?
Towards more flexible, empowered teams. The military is moving from strict hierarchical command to more mission-driven, autonomous teams for exactly the same reason a successful tech company does: adaptability.
Because when problems are really complex and fast-moving, the optimal solutions often have to emerge from those bottom-up interactions within the teams on the ground.
Exactly. A single manager or a single general simply cannot anticipate or process every variable anymore. So team autonomy, team initiative becomes paramount for rapid, effective problem solving in complex environments. #3.2, organizational resilience and innovation.
And in the business world, strategic adaptation requires not just speed, but also a willingness to play the very long game, often coupled with significant calculated risk-taking. Intel provides a classic example of this kind of resilience, doesn't it?
Are absolutely. Their journey with microprocessors, they experimented with that technology for over a decade.
A whole decade. That's a staggering commitment, especially in tech.
It really is. And during that time, they actually spent more money developing the technology than it generated in revenue.
Yeah.
They clearly weren't just optimizing for the next quarterly report.
What were they doing?
They were positioning themselves for the next era of computing. They kept that effort alive, even when it wasn't immediately profitable, until the external circumstances changed, the market shifted, and suddenly microprocessors became a vastly more appealing business than their existing memory chip business.
And that commitment to calculated long-term risk, what does that tell us?
It highlights the immense power of being an early mover. The sources suggest that often only the early movers have the real potential to affect the entire industry structure itself, to actually define the rules of the new game for everyone else, rather than just playing by rules that others have already set.
And organizational resilience isn't just about products. It often comes from surviving a major crisis of culture. Pixar had a famous experience like this during the development of Toy Story 2.
Yes, that's a crucial story for understanding their culture. Disney, their partner at the time, initially requested Toy Story 2 be a direct-to-video release, not a theatrical one.
Which implies lower budget, lower stakes.
Exactly. And that immediately set a lower artistic expectation internally at Pixar. It inadvertently fractured the culture.
How?
It created a visible A team working on the prestigious theatrical releases, and a B team stuck working on this supposedly less important direct-to-video sequel. And this had a profoundly negative impact on morale and, initially, on the quality of the film.
So what happened?
The dedicated crew members on Toy Story 2 basically refused to produce B-level work. They couldn't reconcile it with Pixar's identity. It forced a massive crisis and pivot, where they essentially scrapped most of the film and started over, elevating it to a full theatrical release.
And the lasting lesson from all that pain and effort?
It became a cultural vow. Pixar leadership vowed they would never compromise quality or split their culture that way again, regardless of the distribution channel. It was this foundational, painful moment that reinforced their core priorities. Story, quality, and cultural cohesion above immediate financial expediency.
They realized that compromising their artistic integrity was like making a huge withdrawal from their emotional bank account with their own employees.
Absolutely. And this commitment to the long view extends to management's responsibility for the workforce itself. The sources stress that it is actually management's job to protect motivated, often workaholic employees from their own willingness to pursue excellence at absolutely all costs.
Even the cost of their own health and well-being.
Precisely. This means actively building policies that enforce healthy habits, providing appropriate amenities, making sure people take vacations, and critically, ensuring that taking necessary leave like maternity or paternity leave is explicitly supported and not seen as an impediment to career advancement.
Because the alternative model.
The alternative, that kind of toxic churn and burn model you sometimes see, especially in highly competitive sectors where a company just exploits smart, hungry kids till they burn out and then cycles out the bottom 15% every year, that structure sacrifices invaluable long-term institutional knowledge and loyalty for very short-term gain. True organizational resilience requires protecting your most valuable asset, your people. Hashtag 3.3. Management systems for clarity and accountability, OKRs.
Okay, so building a resilient, innovative, high-performing organization requires translating these broader cultural ideas like trust, candor, long-term thinking into concrete, measurable management systems. Objectives and key results, or OKRs, are a powerful modern example designed specifically to bring clarity and accountability.
Yes, OKRs have become very influential, particularly coming out of places like Intel and Google. But the sources also warn that structured goal-setting systems like these are often implemented really poorly.
How so? What's the common failure mode?
The biggest one is thinking these systems will take root just by executive fiat, by just ordering people to do them. They won't. Leaders must fully model the behavior themselves, first and consistently.
So it's a huge red flag if the CEO says something like,
"Oh, all my goals are just team goals." That's often code for, I'm not actually holding myself publicly accountable here. Only the operational people down the line are.
So public committed goal setting by the leadership team itself is absolutely essential. They have to say, this is what I am personally committed to achieving, and this is how we will measure my success.
Exactly. If the very highest level of the organization doesn't visibly model the process, doesn't show vulnerability in setting ambitious goals, the entire system gets dismissed by everyone else as just more bureaucratic overhead.
And assuming leadership does model it, what do OKRs do so brilliantly when implemented well?
They clarify priorities with ruthless efficiency, and they force rapid organizational alignment. The objective is the qualitative goal. What do we want to achieve? It should be significant, concrete, action-oriented, inspirational.
And the key results.
The key results are the quantitative metrics. How will we know if we've achieved the objective? They need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound SMART criteria apply here. Typically 3 to 5 KRs per objective.
And when a goal gets elevated to become a top-line company, OKR.
That visibility changes everything. It means all eyes in the company are suddenly focused on the teams responsible for delivering those key results. This clarity forces alignment across different functions. It stops departments from unknowingly working on conflicting or low-priority initiatives.
So if the top objective is, say, successfully launch product X this quarter, then every necessary team engineering, marketing, sales, legal support knows precisely what their specific key results must contribute to achieving that single overarching goal.
Right, it creates focus and coordination. And the modern innovation here is pairing OKRs with what John Doerr calls CFRs, continuous performance management, through conversations, feedback, and recognition.
Okay, CFRs. This is where the adaptation happens. Moving beyond just checking if the KR was met.
Exactly. CFRs ensure the ongoing conversations around the OKRs aren't limited to just, did you hit the target number? Yes or no? It must fundamentally address the deeper strategic questions.
Such as?
Was this key result actually the right measure for the objective in the first place? Or was achieving this goal far harder or maybe far easier than we initially projected? What does that tell us? Or critically, does the outcome here, success or failure, signal a change in the market or our capabilities that demands we consider a strategic pivot?
So you need to elicit these ongoing insights from every level. It turns performance assessment from just a backward-looking inspection into an adaptive, forward-looking learning process.
Precisely. OKRs provide the clear targets and alignment, but CFRs provide the crucial organizational intelligence and agility required to adjust those targets, or even the whole strategy, if reality dictates. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow, what an incredible synthesis of really millennia of humans striving for effective systems. We started way back in antiquity, seeing how systems built on justice, on legitimate reputation, tend to endure, while those built primarily on fear and expediency inevitably seem to collapse inward.
Yeah, and then we moved inward, didn't we? Recognizing that internal character strength, that willingness Emerson highlighted to be lovely rather than just loved, is the absolute prerequisite for the kind of vulnerability that enables profound trust in relationships and teams.
And we closed by examining how these ancient foundations directly inform the most successful modern systems. Everything from the strategic adaptation needed on Clausewitz or Sense's desperate ground to the necessity of building organizational anti-fragility through deep cultural commitment, like we saw at Pixar.
And through rigorous clarity and continuous learning, like with the OKR and CFR framework, it all connects.
The danger, though, now just as much as in Cicero's time, remains that hindsight trap, doesn't it? We have to constantly fight the outcome bias.
Absolutely. Poor evidence, if it happens to lead to a successful outcome, can still make a very, very good story. And that feeling of coherence can make us dangerously overconfident in our decisions or models.
But the lesson from Cicero, from Hobbes's Fool, it still holds. The stupid decision, one based on a flawed ethical framework or a poor practical model, is still stupid, even if, by sheer luck, it happens to work out well this time. Success doesn't automatically validate a flawed process.
Which brings us, perhaps, to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. If the Bhagavad Gita suggests that knowledge grants liberation and ignorance creates bondage, consider this. What critical, non-spiritual principle have you maybe encountered today, whether it's in leadership styles, strategic defense, psychological resilience, organizational design, where truly understanding that principle, where knowledge of that system immediately grants you a measure of freedom from unnecessary constraint, and where ignorance of it tends to lock you, or maybe your organization, into a cycle of predictable, avoidable failure. Find that principle for yourself and apply that liberation.